Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Game Nexus. It's Dwayne here and Stewart. We got a special episode for you tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about some recent current events that just occurred in the game industry. Stu's going to fill us in on that. And essentially what we're talking about is in the past 2 days, roughly, we've had two gaming companies that were in the middle of making product and were quite successful at what they were doing, decided to close their doors. Yeah, it's quite, it's worth talking about because it definitely opens the door for conversation about the state of the game industry and sort of why this happened. So I'm going to let Stu here take us on a little history lesson on these guys and who we're talking about.
So yeah, it's a pretty sad story coming out very recently. So Spartan Games and Tor Games have both completely closed shop, with a press release from each company basically stating their reasoning for it and why they did it. But it's sad. These are two companies people invested countless thousands of hours into, employed, potentially dozens or more people in total if you go through the whole supply line.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bummer, and they made great games, and both Tor and Spartan should be immensely proud of what they've done.
And they fall into that category of small game designers, that we're not talking big business.
Yes,
yeah.
Very, very niche, especially for Tor. Spartan was actually doing quite well, and they were branching out. They got the Halo license,
which is no small feat.
No small feat at all. They were producing beautiful miniatures, great game for that, and they were in the middle of a Kickstarter for an expansion to one of their games, like that just got canceled. So this is,
And did they hit their mark on their crowdfunding?
They did not, but they were very close.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, it speaks to how, these structures are just crumbling around people.
Yeah.
Without them even potentially realizing it until it's too late.
So who should we sort of dive into, just to give the audience a little bit of background on sort of what the details of it specifically are?
So, okay, so Spartan Games is it's about a 10-year-old company. They had 3 proprietary games. They had Uncharted Seas, which was their fantasy naval game. They had Dystopian Wars, which was their alternate future steampunk game, and they had Firestorm, which was their sci-fi game. And both of those latter games encompassed like a naval style game and a ground combat game. They were just relaunching like basically a second wave of Firestorm.
Yeah.
They had a terrain line, which I'm especially bummed out about that going, because I really wanted a set of their sort of sci-fi habitats that would have been amazing. Infinity terrain, just fantastic.
So this is a terrain line that was universally, it wasn't just custom for those games?
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. So they were multifaceted.
Yeah, and they had sort of, I guess, if you could point to a point where there was sort of cracks in the armor, was like last year they were doing a universal terrain system which involved card tiles and then clips, and you could build rooms, and that Kickstarter basically failed to launch. And they sort of went back to the drawing board, but they seemed to just take it in stride. They were, went back to the drawing board, realized this really wasn't a good venture for them, and their press release was saying that after they restructured, their profits were up, everything was going great, but they appear to have had a high-level management individual succumb to some sort of ailment, very chronic ailment. They didn't stay.
So leadership took a hit.
And that just completely made them unable to keep up with the very rigorous demand of leading a company. Which.
And this is all public that they've announced? Like this is sort of...
Yes.
Yeah, okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
And that was that made of it, like that was their reasoning for closing up shop? Or
one of their reasons.
Okay,
yeah.
Gotcha.
It was just that they're...
So it's not a complete mystery as to why it happened.
No.
They issued a good public statement.
Oh yeah. No, we know why. It's still a bummer though. And then Tor was a company. They were producing their own line of games called Relics, and it was a sort of sci-fi game, very kind of loose forces. You could take any number of units. There's alternate activations on a 3-foot field, low terrain requirements. The models look awesome. They, seem to have been made with quite a bit of care, and there was a lot of passion you could tell in that product. But the interesting thing that came out of their press release was a discussion about crowdfunding and market saturation, which we're going to dive into.
Yeah, and as an outsider asking the question, so which is the company that had the Halo license? Is that Tor?
That was Spartan.
Okay, yeah, conveniently. Okay, so from an outsider asking it, I guess you just named all their product lineups, and like our viewers right now are probably maybe in the same boat as me, going, I've never heard of these games.
Exactly.
Right, and so they were successful, but they didn't quite hit that mainstream level of success we're seeing with like Games Workshop product or Fantasy Flight.
Yeah.
So I guess leading into that question about the crowdfunding, what was the Tor sort of? What was their soundbite as far as one of those?
They were hitting on the fact that they did not feel ethically comfortable with the model of basically externalizing all of the financial risk onto the public.
Right. Left a bitter taste in his mouth, quote unquote, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And we see lots of companies that do a ton of crowdsourcing. It is a fantastic tool because it is all your financing and all your market research in one convenient place. All you've potentially invested is maybe a couple dozen hours in creating a video and a page for it. If it doesn't fire, you haven't invested potentially tens of thousands of dollars designing models.
Yeah, and the trade-off is you are also at the same point you're pre-selling your product.
Yes.
Right. Like you some of the rewards you'll see is you pledge this much, you get a copy of the game. So that's really you're just asking people if they want to buy it before it's out.
Yep.
Right. So I mean that seems to be quite common.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he sort of segued from that into looking at the market saturation. And I think if you're anybody who's been in the wargaming hobby for more than a decade, you will understand what that means. The amount of games, it's an explosion of content. We are in a glut of high quality games with amazing miniatures.
Yeah, but all crowdfunded.
But a lot of them are crowdfunded because these companies are able to sort of segue a pet project of they've been working on some models on their computer in CAD. They're able to segue that into an actual viable business by getting other people to pay them to finish their projects.
I've got kind of a two-pronged opinion on it. I mean, for one, it takes highly creative people who don't have resources and allows them to get their product out into the world.
Yes.
So that's cool. I like that. But on the flip side of it, you have potentially people saying, why would I take a risk, both creatively and financially, if I can do a crowdfund and just get it paid for up front? And I'm a creative person by nature, and I find that sometimes risk and uncertainty drives the creative process forward versus knowing you've got money in hand for it. So now maybe in the back of your mind, you sort of let that slip a little bit and go, I was going to add this feature or I was going to work on this, but we've already got it funded, so maybe nobody will notice.
It's possible.
Yeah. So he also mentioned something about, like you said, the distribution model. So what is that all about as far as how that sort of killed them off a bit?
So he just sort of was talking about how the ability to take an idea, crowdfund it, and sell it directly to the consumer was subverting that traditional model where you would have an idea, you would scrounge up venture capital from banks, you would hire people, you would design it, you would produce it, and then you would,
hit the street trying to sell it to wholesalers.
And getting it onto shelves. And another good point he made is these stores are not infinitely large. They have very limited shelf space. And the just incredible amount of games means that getting your game on the shelf becomes that much harder. Right. If we're looking at a chart of the market, Fantasy Flight Games, Games Workshop, and Privateer Press probably have 95% of that market, and everybody else is fighting for that other 5%.
And coincidentally, those three companies you listed do not crowdfund any product.
They do not.
Right. And so the store shelf is still the holy grail for these games for the most part, if you want to hit that mass level of success,
Yes.
right? So it almost seems like if you crowdfund a project, the hopes of getting it onto a shelf is pretty much at that point nil, because that's the marketing path you've chosen, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it's an evil in the sense that you need
Mm-hmm.
the store shelf to
Mm-hmm.
obtain that level of success.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like damned if you don't, and damned if you do. Like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, so I can see that being
Yeah.
a problem. Now, were any of these games on shelf? Like, could you walk into a local game store and see Relics and the Halo miniature game
I'm sure
somewhere?
somewhere,
Yeah,
but they were never in our city.
in our local city, yeah.
Um,
So if that's sort of paints the picture for
Yeah.
other cities, then it would have been limited distribution.
yeah, and like I don't want to just crap all over Kickstarter, because
No.
without Kickstarter we wouldn't have
Some amazing stuff.
Steamforged games. They wouldn't exist.
Right.
They funded
Guild Ball.
entirely on Kickstarter.
Yeah.
That's where they got all of their capital to start, and they make amazing games.
Yeah,
It's
and
the same with Mantic.
yeah, I play Relic Knights right now from Soda Pop Miniatures and Ninja
Yep.
Division. It's all crowdfunded. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
So the
like
quality, we're not saying the quality on crowdfunding is
No.
lesser, but it definitely opens up a door, like sort of Pandora's box as far as sales and how that
Mhm.
product gets out in the world.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's an interesting situation, and I'm hoping we don't see more of it happen with other companies, right? Like that would just be a bad thing for the industry.
Mhm.
But it's definitely worth a discussion. Anything else we want to say on that? Yeah. Yeah, so it's again, it's never a good news story when you hear about companies closing. We definitely want to hear what you guys think about it, because it is a discussion that just like begs everybody's opinion on it. Throw those comments down in the comment section. Make sure you subscribe to us as well and keep the opinions flowing. Try and update you if we get any new info that comes out of this. Thanks for tuning in, guys. This is Dwayne and Stewart checking out.